Hi, it's me, the Storyteller. Thank you for joining me. Most of my stories on this channel are based on actual events, and some aren't. I'll let you decide if these stories are fiction, or if they're not. It wasn't unusual for Sarah to be left in charge. She was 17, old enough to stay home while her parents went out for their anniversary, dinner and a night at a downtown hotel. They'd been planning it for weeks. Sarah had rolled her eyes at their giddy goodbyes, but secretly, she didn't mind. Her younger siblings, Chloe and Liam, were easier these days. Dinner, a movie, lights out by 10. By 10:30, the house was quiet. The rain outside had picked up, steady and rhythmic, tapping lightly against the windows, like a ticking clock. Sarah had cleaned up the dishes, dimmed the kitchen lights, and curled up on the living room couch with a blanket. The soft glow of the TV flickered on her face, casting pale blue light across the darkened room. A sitcom rerun played low, more for noise than entertainment. It was rare to be in the house with this much stillness. It felt peaceful, settled. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that something felt off. Her mind wandered a moment, then she brushed it off. The knock came just after 11. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Sarah sat up, her heart skipping. No one ever came by this late. She paused the TV and listened. Nothing followed, just the rain and her own breathing. She stood, padded quietly toward the front door, and flipped on the porch light. Through the peephole, she saw him. A man stood just outside the door, under the awning. He wore a dark hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low, obscuring his eyes. His face was pale, and in his hands he held a crinkled Uber Eats bag. Sarah blinked. They hadn't ordered anything. She didn't open the door. She hesitated, heart tapping fast in her chest, then called through it, telling him they hadn't ordered food. Maybe he had the wrong address. He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, that bag dangling from one hand. And then she noticed his mouth, twisted into a grin. It was too wide, unnaturally so. Not a friendly smile, not even a forced one. Just too many teeth, too much tension. Like it was stitched onto his face and he didn't quite know how to use it. A chill ran down her spine. She backed away, double-checked the lock, and stood frozen in the hallway, phone in hand. Her fingers felt numb. It was the way he hadn't blinked, the way he hadn't answered. That stupid smile. After what felt like forever, she peeked back through the peephole. He was gone. Sarah checked the side door, the back, locked, secure. Her nerves began to settle just enough to catch her breath. She told herself it was a mistake, some delivery mix-up. Maybe he was high, or maybe just weird. But that grin clung to her thoughts like burrs on skin. Around midnight, she tiptoed down the hallway to check on the kids. Chloe had kicked off her covers again. Sarah gently tucked them back over her and listened to Liam's soft breathing. They looked so peaceful, so unaware. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching, letting herself believe it was all fine. That's when she heard it, tapping, coming from the living room window in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her chest tightened, blood rushing in her ears. The place had shifted. What had been peaceful now felt like the walls were pressing in. The rain blurred everything outside, and the tapping came again. She crept forward, heart hammering, and eased the curtain aside. He was back, standing at the window, inches from the glass. Same clothes, same bag, same grin. His face was tilted just slightly, his head angled low, so the brim of his cap shadowed his eyes. But his mouth, that mouth, hadn't moved. Sarah let the curtain drop. Her breath hitched. Her legs felt weak. She stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug, then scrambled for her phone. It nearly slipped from her hand. She unlocked it and called 911. Her voice shook as she spoke to the dispatcher. They were calm, reassuring, told her officers were already nearby and would be there in minutes. When she hung up, she immediately called her parents. She could barely explain what was happening, and they were already in the car rushing home. As quickly as she hung up, another knock, this time at the side door. A soft scrape against the frame. Then nothing. When the police arrived, the man was gone. They canvassed the property and searched the surrounding yard and hedges. It was one of the officers who spotted the Uber Eats bag lying just beneath the living room window. They picked it up with gloves, opened it. It was empty. No food, no receipt. Just a stale plastic smell and nothing else. Sarah explained everything again. Her parents arrived as the officers were finishing up. They hugged her, confused and shaken. She showed them the doorbell footage, short, grainy clips of a tall man standing on the porch, holding the plastic bag with that creepy smile wiped across his face. Authorities couldn't ID him. The brim of his hat cast a shadow over his face in every frame. The smiling man was never seen again. It was more than just a cabin. It had been in the family for 3 generations, built by his grandfather, kept alive by his father, and now trusted to Caleb. Tucked deep in the Colorado backcountry, the structure sat 2 hours from any paved road and 10 minutes past the last marker on the Forest Service map. No neighbors, no service, just woods and sky and time. He drove up every summer to keep it from falling into ruin. Fix the porch, check the roof, clear the chimney. He stayed alone most trips, but this time he brought Winston, his dog, a stocky, loyal mutt who never barked at nonsense and hated being indoors. The first few days passed like they always did. Caleb chopped wood, fixed a leaky pipe, and swept out the corners. Winston sniffed every tree within a 100-yard radius. At night, they sat on the porch under black skies, the trees whispering to each other in the wind. The silence was comforting, ancient. But by the 3rd night, that silence had changed. It wasn't just quiet. It was vacant, the kind of hush that pulls everything inward, like the woods themselves had pulled a blanket over their mouth. No crickets, no owls, no wind. Just Winston, sitting stiff at the foot of the bed, ears forward, locked on the rear wall of the cabin. Caleb listened. A long minute passed. Then Winston growled, low and steady. The sound of certainty, not confusion. He stepped to the back window, lifted the curtain, saw nothing. But in the darkness beyond the tree line, there came the sound of wood striking wood. A sharp, heavy knock, then silence. His pulse thudded in his throat. He backed away, trying to explain it. Maybe a fallen branch, maybe an elk brushing a dead limb. He didn't believe a word of it. The next day, Winston stayed near the porch, ears twitching. Even the birds felt muted. That evening, Caleb secured the doors, loaded the rifle, and left a lantern burning in the front window. At 2:17 a.m., something hit the back wall. A massive, shuddering thud rattled the windows. Winston exploded into barking, teeth bared, fur rigid. Caleb was already moving, rifle in hand, heart hammering. He yanked the curtain back again. Nothing, just a darkness too thick to trust. He cracked open the front door, letting lantern lights spill onto the ground. There were no prints, no rustling, but something had been there. For the next hour, Winston stood facing the back of the cabin, body tense. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair, rifle across his lap, staring out at the window like it might blink. The following afternoon, Caleb circled the cabin. 20 yards out, he found a pine tree with a long, diagonal scrape across its bark, 7 feet high, stripped clean. No claw marks, no reason. That night, the forest returned to stillness, and then, without warning, came footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They crunched over gravel and circled the cabin, too heavy for any deer, too calculated for any bear. Then came the breath, a single huff, right outside the window. The glass fogged briefly. Winston let out a whine and slid beneath the bed. Caleb froze in place. He could feel it, the presence pressing against the wall. Not pounding, just leaning, like it was testing the structure, testing him. The wall creaked, and then it was gone. The next morning, Caleb packed without a word. He didn't eat, didn't clean. He loaded Winston into the truck and drove until the trees fell away, and the cell signal returned. He didn't speak to anyone for 2 days. When his father finally called to check in, Caleb hesitated before sharing what had happened. He described the sounds, the feeling, the weight of being watched. There was a pause on the other end. Then his father said, "That happened to me once. Your grandfather, too." Caleb hasn't gone back since. Winston still perks up when they pass deep woods, still growls at empty windows when the wind dies. And some nights, Caleb dreams of standing in that cabin again, rifle in hand, walls breathing, something massive just outside. My name's Luke, and I grew up hunting, fishing, and just being out in nature. My dad taught me a lot about the outdoors, but I had a scary camping experience I don't think I'll ever forget. It was the fall of 2017, just a few days before Halloween. I was 25, a couple years out of college, and trying to make something of myself. I had a communications degree with an emphasis in media studies, so I'd been toying with the idea of starting a YouTube channel focused on camping, gear reviews, solo hikes, stuff like that. I had the camera. I had all the backpacking set up. I figured, why not film my first real solo trip as a sort of pilot episode? I wanted it to feel raw, real, not your average campground with picnic tables and families 2 tents over kind of trip. I needed seclusion. Somewhere off the beaten path, if you will. I lived in Rochester, Minnesota at the time, so I picked the driftless area. For those who don't know, the driftless forest area is a stretch of rugged land across parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa that was never flattened by glaciers like most of the Midwest. That means deep river-carved valleys, bluffs, ridgelines, and endless forested pockets where you can go miles without seeing another soul. It's beautiful and unsettling at the same time. Like nature decided not to play by the rules there. I chose a spot that wasn't on any official trail, something I'd found mentioned in an old backpacking forum. A user had posted about a clearing near a ridgeline deep in the forest where the stars were perfect and you could hear any and all wildlife in the distance. It sounded poetic, but I was dumb enough to go alone. Once I arrived, I locked up the truck and hit the trail with my pack over one shoulder. Almost immediately, the forest swallowed the sound behind me. No more distant road hum, no more metallic clink of the tailgate. Just the rhythm of boots on soft dirt and the whisper of trees swaying above. The trailhead was barely marked, just a sun-bleached post with no readable sign, half tilted from rot at the base. Somebody had carved initials into the wood, probably decades ago. and the old directional arrow had peeled clean off. Still, the path was there if you knew where to look. Faint, narrow, the kind of trail that didn't see many feet anymore. It was colder than I expected. Not the dry, crisp kind of cold. This clung to your sleeves, sank down your collar. After the first incline, I could feel my breath catching up to me, little clouds forming with every exhale. The trees were thick, mostly pine, but some scattered aspen as I climbed higher. Their white trunks looked like bone, twisted and leaning, bare in places where bark had peeled off like old scabs. Deadfall lined the slope on either side. Some of it looked fresh. About a mile in, I stopped at a fork in the path, if you could even call it that. The left side faded quickly into underbrush, but the right led to an old weathered trail marker, or what was left of one. It had a rusted metal plate nailed to the top, but whatever had been written on it was long gone, worn down to blotches and oxidation. Deep gouges ran diagonally across the wood. I told myself it was weather, but even as I stood there staring, something about it felt deliberate, like claw marks or symbols. I pressed on. At one point, I heard something big shift in the trees off to my right. Then stillness. I stopped, my ears strained to catch the direction. But whatever it was, it didn't move again. I kept walking. About a quarter mile later, I stopped and pulled out my camera. I figured I'd film a quick journal entry while I caught my breath. I wanted to talk about why I was doing this, why solo camping meant something to me. I told the camera it wasn't for clout. I wasn't trying to be the next flashy wilderness influencer or anything. I just wanted space, time away from people, from pressure, from all the noise that piles up during the week. I talked about my dad a little, how he used to bring me out to places like this when I was younger. Not this remote, but similar. We'd fish or just walk trails. And something about those memories stuck deeper than I realized. I said I wanted to capture that again. Some piece of that calm. Maybe share it. I paused then, staring off into the trees, letting the camera run for a few extra seconds before shutting it off. A breeze stirred the branches above me. It sounded like breathing. That was the moment I started to feel watched. I shook it off and kept going. The sun had shifted now, dropping just enough to tint everything with that early golden edge. And that was when I reached the creek. It wasn't high by any standards, despite the amount of rain we had that year. Once across, it took me the better part of the afternoon to reach my destination, maybe 5 or 6 miles in, and the last stretch was off trail, just following game trails and checking my GPS against a satellite image I had saved. The trees were starting to thin out when I finally found the clearing, and it was incredible. Dead silent. Cool, crisp air. Fallen leaves. No drone sounds of far-off highways. Just me and nature. I spent the rest of the daylight setting up camp, filming everything as I went. Tent placement, camp stove review, gear talk, that kind of thing. I even did a little intro talking into the camera about how this was going to be my new thing. Campscape, I had called the channel. By sunset, I had a fire going, some canned stew bubbling, and my camera mounted on a tripod, catching the glow of the flames. My breath came out in soft clouds as the temperature dropped fast, like it always does in those valleys. Still, it felt peaceful, like I'd done something right. Around 10 p.m., I crawled into my sleeping bag and started reviewing footage, trashing unusable clips. That's when I first heard it. Crunch. A single footstep. Clear as day. Not a deer. This was deliberate. Weight. Pressure. Human. I froze, staring at the nylon wall of my tent. I hadn't even zipped the fly shut yet. I slowly turned the camera on, whispered into it that I heard a noise that sounded like a footstep. I crawled forward. peeking out the tent flap with my flashlight. Nothing. Just the soft glow of the dying fire and the trees swaying gently in the windless dark. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was an acorn dropping, I told myself. I zipped the flap closed and laid there, trying to relax. Then I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. 3 steps this time, heavier. I turned the camera on again and whispered, trying to document it like it was still just part of the show. But my voice was shaking. A minute passed, then 5. Silence again. Just as I was about to exhale and say, "Screw it, I'm being paranoid," I heard something else. A second set of footsteps, this one coming from a different direction. Then a third. All slow, purposeful, crunch, shuffle, crunch. I shut the camera off. My fear was rising, and I didn't want to document anymore. I wanted to know who or what was out there. After a couple of moments of silence, I tried to tell myself it was maybe other hikers, just passing through. But that didn't make sense. No headlamps, no dogs, no voices, just the sound of slow, measured steps circling my campsite. I turned the camera back on, mostly for the comfort of the tiny red record light, whispered into it that something wasn't right. Then I reached for my cell phone. No bars, not even one. I mustered up the courage and stepped out of the tent, barefoot, camera in one hand, phone in the other. I slowly panned the light across the tree line. Nothing but silhouettes and a blanket of leaves underfoot. I called out something like, "Is someone there?" No answer. But then, just at the edge of my beam, I caught movement. A shadow ducked behind a tree, and not in an animal way. It was too quick, too vertical. I whispered something into the camera again, I don't even remember what, and backed into the tent, fumbling to zip it shut like that would somehow keep me safe. I turned the flashlight off and sat in the dark, holding my breath. I questioned whether or not I was just jumping at shadows, that it was just raccoons running around out there, and I was just working myself up. Many minutes went by without a sound, then probably an hour. I thought it might be over. I must have dozed off, adrenaline fading and exhaustion finally catching up. Because the next thing I remember, I woke up to a faint noise just before 3 a.m. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was chanting, low, rhythmic, not loud enough to make out words, not any language I recognized, just repetition, from more than one voice, coming deep within the trees. I turned the camera on again, hit record, didn't even speak into it this time, just pointed it at the tent wall while I listened. I swear the sounds were moving, like the voices were circling me. 1 minute to my left, the next behind me. At some point, something touched the side of the tent, just a fingertip it felt like, pressing in. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat just locked. I knew then I wasn't going to make it till daylight. I made my decision fast, threw on my boots, didn't even lace them, and stuffed the camera and flashlight in my jacket. I grabbed my phone and GPS but left everything else behind. Tent, food, gear, all of it. I unzipped the tent and bolted. Didn't even look back. I didn't run straight to the car. Some part of me knew if I made a sound, if I let them know where I was, it would all be over. So I broke into a sprint for maybe 30 yards, then veered off and climbed a small ridge I'd scouted earlier when I was filming. There was a break in the trees there, high ground with just enough elevation to see the camp if I crouched between the roots of an old cedar. From that perch, I could just make out my tent down below. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing like a dying heart. But the camp wasn't empty. They were there, all 3 of them. At first I thought they were just shapes, like shadows stretching weird in the moonlight. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw details. They were human, or looked it, but they moved in this awkward, theatrical way, like they were performing for something. Each of them wore dark, tattered robes or cloaks, the fabric swaying as they moved. Their faces were covered by crude masks, like papier-mâché or molded bark, rough with jagged holes where eyes should be. One of them stepped close to my tent and began pulling things out. My sleeping bag, my pack, my food, even my camera bag, tossing it all into a messy circle near the fire. Another circled the fire pit, sprinkling something from a small leather pouch. Whatever it was, it made the embers flare unnaturally, casting this weird greenish glow into the clearing. Then one of them crouched and dragged something from the dirt, something they'd made. It looked like a crude symbol, drawn with stones and sticks in a circular pattern, the same place where my tent had been. I couldn't make out the details, but it made my skin crawl. The third one just stood still, staring into the trees, head cocked like he was listening. I decided to move, slowly, quietly. But when I shifted my weight, my boot pressed against a branch. Snap. The sound cracked through the woods like a gunshot. All three figures froze. I ducked instinctively, heart punching my ribs. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. No sound. Then I peeked again. They were looking up the ridge, right at me. They couldn't possibly see me in the dark, but somehow they knew. The one with the pouch raised an arm and pointed toward my side of the ridge. No words. Just this awful, slow gesture. Then the others started climbing. They climbed faster than I expected. Their movements were wrong, jerky at first, then suddenly quick and smooth, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. I turned, ran hard, and didn't stop. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the trees as I cut through underbrush and thorns. I slipped twice, cut my arm on something, twisted my ankle. Somewhere behind me, I heard them running too, not yelling, not calling out, just footsteps, more than one set, gaining. I found the game trail by memory, scrambled down an embankment, crossed a shallow creek, and kept moving. I didn't stop until I saw the soft glow of a trail marker where I'd come in the day before. I was shaking, cold, but alive. I made it back to my car and peeled out of there like I was being hunted, which maybe I was. By the time I made it home, the sun was rising. I slept for maybe 2 hours before calling my dad. I didn't even tell him everything. Just said I thought someone had messed with my campsite and I wanted to grab what was left before it got stolen or rained on. He didn't ask questions. Just said he'd drive. We went back that afternoon, and on the drive, I ended up telling my dad everything. He was speechless, but he believed me. This made me feel a lot better. I knew I didn't imagine it. We trekked in the way I went before. It seemed a bit quicker getting there this time, and I felt so much safer with my dad. More so, that he decided to bring his hunting rifle along. Everything looked different in daylight. Smaller, less threatening. But the damage was real. My tent was ripped open. The ashes of my gear sat in a black ring where the fire had been. The stone pattern I'd seen was still there, half buried, shaped into a rough spiral with jagged edges, like a child's drawing of the sun. And there was something else. Hanging from a branch above the clearing was a small bundle made of twigs and hair, bound together with a strip of blackened fabric. My dad said it was probably some prank from local kids, but I knew better. It wasn't kids, and it wasn't a prank. I didn't touch anything. We just packed what little was salvageable and left. I never camped alone again. Never launched that YouTube channel either. Got a job at one of those big marketing firms that help businesses grow, producing video content and developing social media strategies. I still think about that camping trip sometimes, what those figures were doing, what they wanted, whether it was a ritual or a warning, or maybe an invitation. If I'm honest, I really don't ever want to know. My name is Danielle, and I don't really know who else to share this with. This happened to me back in 2016 when I was living alone in a little rental house just outside Hickory, North Carolina. I've told a few friends over the years, but they always think I'm exaggerating, or worse, making it up entirely. But I know what I saw, and what I survived. But every Halloween it creeps back into my mind. So here's my story, as best as I can remember it. I was 29, working the night shift at a little roadside diner. It was the kind of place with sticky menus, a jukebox that barely worked, and regulars who ordered the same meatloaf every Tuesday. The hours sucked, but the tips were decent, and Reggie, the cook, always made me something extra to take home. That night was like any other. I clocked out around midnight, said goodnight to the crew, and grabbed my to-go box from Reggie. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The air was damp and cold when I stepped outside. I remember that. It was quiet in the parking lot, and my old Honda was parked at the rear end of the lot. The owner always asked us to park there to leave room up front for the customers. I didn't hear anything weird, yet. Just the usual shadows under the trees. The drive home was uneventful, other than noticing I still had a red hair clip in my hair that I had borrowed from a coworker. I placed it in the cup holder so I wouldn't forget to give it to her the next time I saw her. When I arrived at my old one-story house, set back from the road, I remembered the porch light had burned out a few days earlier, and I hadn't gotten around to replacing it. So I pulled into a patch of darkness, headlights sweeping across the front of the house. I grabbed my dinner from the passenger seat and used my cell phone light to light my path. Once inside, I locked the door behind me. I heard the heater click on, which was always a comforting sound. I kicked off my shoes, turned on the TV, and set the food down on the coffee table. It was around 12:40 a.m. A few minutes into a rerun of The Office, I heard a knock on the back door. I muted the TV with the remote and listened again. Another knock. The back door opened out to a small wooden deck, half rotted and overlooking the tree line. You couldn't get there without walking through the side yard. Plus, the motion light hadn't triggered. Another knock, slow, deliberate. I set my plate down and crept toward the kitchen, staying low and quiet. The back door had a curtain over the window, thin enough that I could see the shadow of someone standing there. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I had. In hindsight, that was probably the most scary cliché thing I could have done. Then I pulled the curtain aside just enough, and I swear to God, there was a man standing there, wearing a creepy clown mask. Not the plastic kind. It looked handmade. White face, red triangles under the eyes, and big yellow tufts for hair. The rubbery mouth was painted into a huge, crooked grin. He didn't say anything. Didn't move. Just stood there, gripping a rusted axe in both hands. I backed away, scrambled for my phone, and called the police immediately. I could barely speak. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden and stay on the line. She said units were on the way, but I knew the closest patrol car was probably 20 minutes out. I stayed crouched under the kitchen counter, knife still in hand, staring at the door. The man knocked again, this time with the blunt end of the axe. Boom, boom, boom. Then, silence. But I hadn't heard him leave. That's what made it worse. After 2 minutes of dead quiet, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the kitchen, keeping the knife raised, and crept through the house, checking every window, every door. The front door was still locked. The blinds in the hallway windows were closed. But when I reached the small laundry room near the back of the house, there he was, standing at the side window, head tilted like a curious animal, the axe pressed up against the glass. He tapped it once, then raised his hand and slowly waved at me, like he thought he was being funny. I screamed, running straight into the bathroom, and ducked out of view. I locked the door and barricaded it with the trash can, then sat down on the floor, knife shaking in my grip. The dispatcher kept asking me what was happening, but I was in shock. I didn't know how to explain the sick grin on that mask, the way he just stood there like he had all night to wait. A few minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps outside. I couldn't tell if they were real or just my mind turning shadows into noise. Then another knock, this time at the bathroom window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just slid down to the floor and started crying. The dispatcher said the police were approaching. I crawled out, heart pounding, and made my way back to the living room. I turned on every light, but outside was pitch black. That's when I saw the police lights approaching. My heartbeat finally started to slow. When the cops showed up, he was long gone. They checked the area, found nothing. No tracks in the yard. No signs of forced entry. One officer asked if I might have imagined it. Typical. I didn't stay home that night. Instead, I called the server who had given me the hair clip and told her what happened. She let me stay with her for a couple of days until I could figure out what I wanted to do. But the police said those kinds of offenders, or pranksters, don't usually return once the cops get involved. So I mustered up the courage to go back home. But that didn't last long. A week later, when I arrived at work, I went to put my jacket and purse in my locker before my shift. When I opened it, my soul dropped to the pit of my stomach. Sitting right there inside, taped to the door, was a Polaroid photo of me in my car that same night, just before driving home. I knew this because I could see the red hair clip in my hair I had borrowed. The photo was taken from behind the dumpster, through the windshield, headlights washing out my face, but it was unmistakably me. On the back, written in thick black letters, like from a Sharpie, were 4 words: "You're fun to watch." A week later, I moved in with my sister on the other side of the state and got another job at an upscale restaurant in one of those gentrified, small-town main streets. I don't know if it was because this incident happened to me that I began to notice, but apparently there were a large string of news stories of creepy men dressed in clown costumes in 2016, even ones that ended horrifically. I don't know who that man was at my back door that night, or what he wanted. All I know is he found me once, and I have always questioned whether or not he could find me again. My name's Mason, and this, I'll call it hiking nightmare, happened in 2012. I lived in Boise, Idaho, and was an avid hiker at the time, with a huge emphasis on was. I explored new trails almost every weekend as I became pretty addicted to it. On this particular week, I took Friday off work and drove about 200 miles to a place I'd never been. The trail was listed on a hiking forum under one of those too vague names: Hidden Creek, North Fork Loop. A half circle of forest and ridge running around a glacier-fed lake, only accessible by foot. I parked on the shoulder of a narrow pull-out road, gravel popping under the tires as I eased to a stop. The trailhead was just past a sagging wooden gate and a faded sign with a green U.S. Forest Service logo, but no real name. No map. Just a few bullet holes in the corner of the sign and the vague sense that people didn't come here often. I stepped out of the car into that kind of silence you only get in the mountains, thick and almost alive. I was lacing up my boots when I noticed the other car. It was an older silver Subaru, parked about 30 feet down the road, nose half in a ditch. It looked like it had been there a while. Windows dusty, a few pine needles stuck to the windshield. I assumed someone else was already up on the trail until I saw her. She was leaning against the driver's side door, arms folded like she'd been waiting. She smiled when she saw me, just a quick, polite flash. Maybe mid-30s, athletic build, dark hair pulled back, big hiking pack resting on the ground next to her. She didn't wave or call out, just kind of waited for me to say something first. I asked if she was heading out on the trail too, and she said, no, well, maybe. She'd planned to meet a friend, but the friend never showed. Said she'd been waiting for nearly an hour and was just about to give up when I pulled in. There was a pause. One of those moments where you know a question's coming before it's even spoken. Then she asked if I was hiking alone. I told her yeah, I was. Just a weekend loop. Wanted to camp near the lake, maybe do some photos. She nodded. Then she asked if I'd mind the company. I didn't know what to say at first. I mean, she seemed normal enough. Friendly. Confident. There was no awkwardness in her body language, and her pack looked like it had seen real use. I hesitated, then told her it was fine as long as she didn't mind my pace. I like to take it slow, stop for photos sometimes. She said she didn't mind, grabbed her pack, and we started walking together into the trees. We introduced ourselves after the first switchback. She said her name was Raquel. The first few miles were quiet in a good way. We didn't talk constantly, just enough to keep things from getting awkward. She mentioned she lived about 3 hours south and had been trying to get out more lately, away from the noise. I told her I worked remote most days, so a weekend offline was half necessity, half detox. We paused at a small overlook mid-morning, where the trees thinned and gave us a hazy view of the ridge ahead. I took a few photos, nothing amazing, just for memory's sake, and offered to take one of her. She politely declined, saying she never liked pictures of herself. Then, almost like an afterthought, she added that she wasn't big on social media either. Something about the way she said it stood out. Not judgmental, not shy, just final. Like the conversation didn't need to go any further. We hiked for another 20 minutes before I got that feeling. You know the one. Like something's just out of view. Like you're being watched. At first, I chalked it up to being in unfamiliar terrain, even though I wasn't technically alone. But the feeling lingered. I caught myself glancing behind us more than once. Eventually, we crossed a small stream, a rocky little dip in the trail with slick moss and a few scattered logs acting as makeshift bridges. As I stepped across, I instinctively turned back to offer Raquel a hand, and that's when I saw it. Up the hill, maybe 100 yards through the trees, someone was standing. I didn't see their face, just the shape. Male, tall, wide shoulders, wearing mismatched clothing, camo jacket, dark pants, and something that looked like a leather apron or utility belt hanging across the front. His head was covered, either a hood or long hair, I couldn't tell. He wasn't moving, just standing there, angled toward us. I blinked. My heart kicked a little. But when I looked back, he was gone. Raquel asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I saw someone. She followed my gaze, eyes scanning the hillside. When she didn't see anything, she shrugged and said it was probably a hunter. Maybe someone out checking trail cams or scouting. She said folks like that come and go all the time. I wanted to believe her. It was early fall after all, hunting season in some areas. But something about the figure, it hadn't felt like a coincidence. I nodded anyway and let it go. For now. We pressed on, deeper into the trail. The sun had shifted overhead, and the air took on that high country stillness, like the woods were holding their breath. The only sounds were the occasional bird call and the rhythmic crunch of our boots. Raquel had warmed up a little. She wasn't overly talkative, but she asked about my job, where I'd grown up. Her questions were casual, surface level, yet focused, like she was gathering a profile. We stopped at a clearing around noon, and I offered to make lunch. A small camp stove, some instant rice and tuna, nothing special. Raquel sat across from me on a fallen log, her back straight, hair pulled loose from her pack strap. She wasn't overly talkative, but there were moments, a faint smirk when I joked about my terrible camp meals, the way her eyes lingered a second too long when I looked up. That made me wonder if she was flirting or just being polite. It had been almost 2 years since my last relationship ended, and I'd convinced myself I was better off keeping to myself. But something about Raquel, the calm, the quiet steadiness, made me curious in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I told myself it was nothing, just two hikers sharing a trail and some silence. Still, when we packed up and started walking again, I caught myself watching her a moment longer than I meant to. After lunch, we descended into a shallow valley. The trail dipped toward a creek, a slow-moving, rocky stream that wound along the base of the ridge like a lazy vein. We moved quietly, the air cooler down here, dense with pine and fir. Everything felt closed in, and that's when I saw him again. Across the creek, maybe 50 yards out. Behind a tree. This time I saw more detail. The man was wearing a long leather apron, like the kind a butcher might wear. Or maybe a blacksmith. Camo jacket underneath, hood up, a dark beard barely visible. He wasn't moving, just watching. He had something in his hand, long, angled. I stopped cold. Raquel stepped beside me, following my gaze again. But when I pointed, the man was already gone, just like before. I asked if she'd seen him. She shook her head slowly, then said, maybe it was a hunter. Again. Her tone was flat, like she was trying not to spook me. I pressed her a little, asked if it seemed normal to her that someone would just be standing like that, in silence. Twice now, watching us. She hesitated. Then she shrugged and said it was probably nothing. Maybe someone out doing their own solo hike who got spooked by us first. It didn't feel like nothing. We crossed the creek and kept going. My pulse was still elevated. I glanced behind us every few minutes, but saw nothing. Eventually, we reached a switchback that curved up toward a higher ridge. That's when Raquel finally said something strange. She mentioned how nice it was that the trail was still quiet, even this far in. Not many people would hike this deep unless they knew exactly where they were going. It was the way she said it that stuck with me, like she wasn't surprised at all. I kept walking, but the tension never left my shoulders. Every pine needle crunch, every breeze rustling the underbrush, made my ears twitch. I wasn't having fun anymore, not even close. Raquel, meanwhile, seemed unaffected. She pointed out a patch of wildflowers, commented on the ridgeline, even suggested we push just a little farther, to a spot she said would overlook a hidden lake. That was the first time I pushed back. I told her I didn't feel right, that I'd had this weird gut feeling ever since the trailhead, that I'd seen the guy twice now, and it wasn't sitting well. Her face changed, not annoyed exactly, more like disappointed, like she thought I was being dramatic. She asked if I was scared. I didn't answer that directly. I just told her I was going to turn back. Said she could come with me or not. but I wasn't staying up here any longer than I had to. She didn't argue. Not exactly. She just stood there for a second, still as stone. Then quietly said, "You go ahead. I'll catch up." I didn't wait. I turned and started down the trail the way we came, heart thudding, watching the trees now with full awareness. Something felt cracked, wide open. Not just the man with the crossbow. Her too. 10 minutes into the descent, just before the ridge curved down toward the creek, I heard her voice echo behind me. "He's getting away." It wasn't panic. It wasn't confusion. It was directive. I didn't look back. Branches tore at my sleeves as I barreled downhill, feet sliding on gravel and wet pine needles. My only goal now was distance. Just get away. That's when the first bolt hissed past me. It struck a tree just off the trail with a dead thump, clean and fast, no warning. I dropped instantly, crawling into the brush. My breathing was so loud I thought it might give me away. Somewhere uphill, I heard the rush of movement, Raquel's voice, low and urgent. Another set of footsteps joined hers, heavier, purposeful. He was real. They were both real, and they were working together. My backpack kept getting caught on branches, and it was slowing me down. I tried to power through, but it was dragging me back like a leash, so I yanked the straps off my shoulders, letting it drop into the brush. I had at least $600 invested in that pack and what was inside it, but I didn't care. I'd rather lose gear than lose my life. I kept going, half running, half falling down the switchbacks that had felt so calm and scenic on the way up. Now they were death traps, exposed and open. I could still hear movement behind me, crashing through underbrush, low grunts, and then Raquel's voice, calling my name, sweet at first, then sharper. Then came the whistling thunk of another bolt. It struck a tree just inches from me. I veered hard, nearly tumbling off the edge of a dry ravine, and slid down it, scraping my hands and arms on broken branches and thorny roots. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed for oxygen, but adrenaline refused to let me slow down. Eventually, I broke through a final row of trees, and the trailhead opened up in front of me like salvation. My car sat there, untouched. I sprinted across the gravel lot, flung open the door, and got in. No hesitation, no looking back. As I fumbled the keys into the ignition, I heard something behind me. Not a shout, not a step, just breathing, heavy, close. I hit the lock button, slammed it. Then I turned the key. The engine stuttered for half a second that felt like forever, then roared to life. I backed out so fast, the tires sprayed gravel. I didn't even glance in the rear view until I was half a mile down the road. When I finally did, the trailhead was empty. But I swear, I caught a glimpse of that same pale green flannel shirt, standing just behind the tree line. When I got home, I talked to a couple of friends about my experience. I asked them if I should call the police and file a report. One of my friends didn't think it would even make a difference. Where I was hiking was very remote. No chance of there being any CCTV cameras nearby. I hadn't gotten that license plate number from Raquel's car either, if it was even her car to begin with. My friend said it could have been another victim's car. That sat with me a moment. It was then I realized how lucky I really was. But the what-ifs still haunt me. What if I hadn't noticed that man by the stream? What if I hadn't turned around when I did? What if I'd followed Raquel deeper into the woods, where cell service cuts out, and no one hears you scream? I think about that last moment, when she turned, eyes locking onto mine, and called out, "He's getting away." It wasn't shock in her voice, it was disappointment, like I'd ruined their plan. I never hike solo anymore, and I'm extremely cautious of other hikers now. I can guarantee one thing. I'll never trust anyone on the trail like that again. The first clip arrived on a Thursday. Daniel had just returned from work, keys still in hand, when he saw the email. No subject line, no text, just a download link labeled simply 01.mp4. He nearly deleted it, but something about the blandness of it, how it didn't try to bait him or scare him, made him click. The video opened to grainy nighttime footage, black and white and jumpy, like from a cheap outdoor security cam. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. A man stepped into frame. The camera was pointed at the side alley near Daniel's apartment. Trash bins, a chain-link gate. The man wore a hoodie. It took less than 5 seconds for Daniel to realize the man was him. Same build, same way of walking, slightly heavy on the left foot. But he had no memory of leaving the apartment at 2:17 a.m. In fact, he'd gone to bed around 11 the night before, alone. He'd scrolled his phone until midnight, then plugged it in and passed out. He remembered waking to his alarm at 6:45, nothing in between, and yet there he was, moving through the alley. He watched the clip twice. The figure just walked past the trash bins, out of frame. The video ended, 31 seconds long. Daniel spent that night awake in his chair, staring at the hallway that led to his bedroom. He pulled up his phone's health app. No steps recorded during that time. No phone activity. He checked his indoor smart camera, the one mounted in the living room near the front door. Nothing. No movement. No sound. No door opening. But the alley in the video. That was definitely behind his building. Even the scuffed dumpster was the same. 3 nights later, another clip arrived. 02.mp4. This one was longer, nearly 2 minutes, different location. Daniel again, hooded, slow, but this time in the stairwell of a nearby parking garage. He descended 2 levels, then stood near a wall for nearly a full minute, unmoving, hands by his sides. Then he turned and walked off camera. Daniel had never parked there in his life. He didn't own a car, but he recognized the place. It was 4 blocks from his office. A co-worker once got mugged there, and Daniel had avoided it ever since. He checked his calendar. That night, he'd been at home, watching a movie on his laptop. He confirmed the streaming history. He even remembered falling asleep on the couch halfway through. The clips kept coming, one every few nights, different timestamps, different cameras, always Daniel, always alone. In 03.mp4, he was seen standing across from a nursing home, just standing, not moving. In 4, he walked through the lobby of a hotel he'd never entered before, brushing shoulders with a night clerk who didn't seem to notice him. 05 showed him sitting on a swing in a playground, still, barely breathing. 4 in the morning. Daniel told no one. What could he say? His friends would joke about sleepwalking, but he knew his habits. He didn't sleepwalk. He never had. And the cameras in his own home always showed nothing. He started keeping notes, drawing maps, highlighting times and addresses. He installed a second camera inside his bedroom, another in the hallway. He even booby-trapped the front door with a string of jingle bells. Nothing. Not a sound. But the emails kept coming, each one more chilling than the last. One showed him at a storage unit facility he didn't recognize. Another had him inside a diner, just staring into his coffee cup. He wore the same clothes each time, hoodie, jeans, but they were always slightly different than what he remembered wearing to bed. Sometimes, The timestamp matched moments he was fully awake, at home, doing something else. And then came the worst one. It was titled Final.mp4. The file size was massive. Daniel hesitated before clicking play. The footage began as usual, low-res black and white, a wide shot of his own apartment building. The angle was unfamiliar, high up, possibly from the rooftop of the building across the street. At first, there was nothing, just a blank street and a parked car. Then, at 2:13 a.m., a figure emerged from the building's front door. Daniel. But he wasn't alone. Another man followed him, tall, slender, wearing something long and dark. The camera quality made it impossible to make out a face, but the movement was wrong, too smooth, almost gliding. The figure stayed close behind Daniel as he walked down the sidewalk. Daniel sat frozen, watching his past self disappear down the street. The video cut. New angle. Inside a subway station. Daniel again, now sitting on a bench, slouched forward like asleep. The tall figure stood a few feet away. No other people in sight. The screen flickered for a moment, then zoomed slightly. The camera panned, whether by operator or on its own, Daniel couldn't tell, and locked in on the tall figure's face. Blurry. But something was off. The eyes were wrong. Too wide, too far apart. The skin around the mouth drooped unnaturally, as if the jaw had been dislocated and loosely reattached. And then it moved. The face twisted toward the camera, directly. Daniel paused the video, tried to breathe. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. When he pressed play again, the screen remained still for several seconds. Then, without warning, the camera began to slowly zoom in. But this time, it wasn't on the figure. It was on Daniel, the sitting version of himself, until, suddenly, his face lifted toward the camera and smiled. The screen went black. Daniel staggered away from his desk. The air in the apartment felt wrong, thicker, like something was watching. He ripped the power cord from the wall, dragged the laptop to the kitchen, and dropped it in the sink. Poured water over it until it sparked and hissed. But it was already too late. That night, the bell trap on the front door jingled. The bedroom camera recorded nothing, just static. But in the morning, Daniel's phone buzzed. No text, just another email. No sender. One new attachment, live.mp4. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give it a like, a comment, and maybe a share. But if you didn't like the stories, maybe share it with someone you don't like. In any case, I'm glad you stuck around to the end.